Thank you very much. It's such an honor to be here today. Unlike my distinguished colleagues, I need to use notes, and I apologize for that, but I'm going to try to stay on track here. Unlike most of you in the audience, my past is longer than my future. I've been invited to share a little bit of that with you today, and I want to start by telling you that I work with photographs. Photography was the last elective that I took as an undergrad, and the magic that you see on the screen of watching a print develop in the darkroom convinced me that I wanted to pursue this. My major was English literature, and that's what I studied because I wanted to teach that in the inner city schools of Philadelphia. That never happened, but lots of other things did. Instead of moving to Philadelphia, I moved to Portugal. My husband was invited to be one of the first American professional basketball players there. I ended up sitting at countless basketball games, so I decided to use that new 35mm camera. I was just 21 years old. I wondered if the newspapers might publish my photographs. After the game, we would return to our apartment, and I worked until midnight developing film and making prints. And we would walk across the city in the middle of the night to put these through a mail slot at the Diário de Lisboa. My reluctant superstar husband was not too keen on this idea, but the next morning, my pictures would appear in the newspaper. I was a sports photographer. Portugal was wonderful. Oops, I went too fast. Portugal was wonderful, but after 4 years, we were ready to return to the United States with a stopover in Paris. Like Hemingway and everyone else, I fell in love with the city. I had a crazy idea. I placed an ad in the International Herald Tribune to see if anyone would hire me. I got one response and had one interview 2 hours before boarding a plane for Chicago. A few days later, I got a telegram offering me a full-time job teaching English as a second language to engineers at Technique, a company that designed oil refineries. They needed an American accent. I had one. If you can't find a job, try placing an ad. It was just as crazy 40 years ago as it would be today. In Paris, I became the breadwinner while my husband studied Chinese. You've heard about this era, the Vietnam War, civil rights, and also the birth of the feminist movement. In the world of photography, women began making self-portraits, and I was among them. Just as a former US president would do 40 years later, I made self-portraits in the bathtub. The British Journal of Photography even put that on the cover of their magazine in 1976. And the London College of Printing invited me to be an artist in residence. I began to feel more kinship with the photographic climate in Great Britain, and after spending 8 years of speaking Portuguese and French, it was time to move back to English. In England, I had a chance to meet an American guru named Minor White, who founded the Creative Photography Laboratory at MIT. He had come to give a workshop. It was a great privilege to meet this legendary teacher, publisher, and photographer. He looked at my photographs, was very encouraging, and asked for one for his next book. He died the next year, though, and that book was never published. After a decade of living in Europe, it was time to return to the United States and start a family. First, I wanted to get a master's degree so that I could teach at a university in the States. And naturally, I was attracted to his program, to the Master of Science in Visual Studies program at MIT, in the laboratory that he founded. But most important for me at MIT was to spend 3 weeks with the man you see on the screen now, Robert Frank. Robert is to photography what Bob Dylan is to rock and roll. MIT had an important neighbor in Technology Square, a photography company called Polaroid. It's bankrupt now, but you may have heard of it. They needed someone to sort through a room full of cardboard boxes. All the boxes had photographs in them, and nobody there had time to look through them. So I was hired. Among the advertising shots, baby pictures, parades, I would find little landscapes by people like this man, Ansel Adams, or even portraits by Andy Warhol, or other famous photographers. So I would take those and set them aside. I thought we shouldn't throw those away. That little project merged with the projects and efforts of others at the company, and it became the Polaroid Collection. That assignment for me, however, meant much more than just crossing Mass Ave from MIT to Polaroid. It offered me the possibility of working with the photographs of others instead of making my own. It was not an easy decision. I would be changing my focus entirely, but I decided to see where it would lead me. It led me to become curator of the Polaroid Collection and director of their Clarence Kennedy Gallery. I had the privilege of exhibiting some of the most incredible photographs ever made, like the one you see on the screen now, Ansel Adams' Moonrise Hernandez. I would often go to New York to explore museums and galleries, and once I visited a YMCA, where I saw photographs by African-American photographer Dawood Bey. When I saw his images, it occurred to me, the Polaroid Collection had no work by photographers of color. Since I had a tiny bit of power, I could do something about this. I sent Dawood cases and cases of Polaroid Type 55 positive-negative film. He did such wonderful work that I invited him to use the ultra-large Polaroid 20 by 24 camera. There were only 5 of them in the world, and all photographers coveted the use of it. Dawood developed such a fine reputation for the portraits he made, and watching his evolution was every bit as gratifying for me as getting my own picture on the cover of the British Journal of Photography. About the same time, I saw photographs by American photographer Carrie Mae Weems, and I was fascinated by her novel approach to setting up a narrative in the early kitchen table series. I invited Carrie to use the camera as well, and this was just one chapter in her amazing trajectory. I loved working at Polaroid, and I was there for 10 years. I worked with incredibly creative colleagues, and we got to distribute film and cameras to photographers around the world. But then in 1993, my husband was offered a position at Carnegie Mellon University. And that's what I said. Leaving Polaroid seemed like a terrible idea to me. Before we had decided on the move, CMU cleverly arranged to have me meet a photographer from the School of Design named Charlie Brodsky, who was working on this book about Homestead. Within no time, Charlie persuaded me that we should work together on an exhibition project that she'd had for years. We proposed the idea to Carnegie Museum of Art, and they accepted it. Charlie and I were joined at the hip for 4 years as we did picture research for this show. We dug into collections in New York and LA, archives of photographers everywhere, including one elderly gentleman from the Hill District of Pittsburgh named Teenie Harris. Here's a portrait that Teenie made in 1945 of Ahmad Jamal playing the piano at the K Boys Club, sitting on a violin case. We managed to introduce Teenie and many unknown photographers to the museum and the museum audience in 1997. And as you may know, the museum went on to establish the Teenie Harris Archive. And this gifted photographer's legacy is now certain. I thought the museum should hire me to be their first curator of photography, but sadly, they weren't ready for that in 1997. Within a short time, I became the executive director of a small nonprofit art center, the kind that Eve was just talking about, on Pittsburgh's south side called Silver Eye Center for Photography. As a tiny place, we took on big projects, one of which was a national fellowship competition for emerging photographers. In 2004, the photographer who won the fellowship was Dylan Vitone, a recent graduate from Mass College of Art. Again, it was satisfying to be helping a young artist at a critical stage in his career. And some of you may know he's now a tenure-track professor here at the School of Design. One fine day in 2008, I got a call from Carnegie Museum of Art offering me a job, the job that I had wanted 10 years earlier. Museums are not known for moving quickly. So I moved from a humble building to a huge one. At the museum, I work with amazing people, a growing collection, and artists who are exploring new directions, such as the GigaPan project that we're collaborating on with the CMU Create Lab. I also work with the celebrated photographer, internationally celebrated photographer you see on the screen now, Dwayne Michaels, who grew up just outside of Pittsburgh. Dwayne is 81, going on 18. He never stops thinking about what he will do next. Gradually, I came to appreciate Pittsburgh, and I felt like I was doing my small part to make it a better place to live. I want to close by telling you, however, about a student of mine, Akihiko Miyoshi. Aki took my history of photography class here at CMU in 2000. He was a PhD candidate in computer engineering. He came to me one day to ask if I would write him a letter, a recommendation for Rochester Institute of Technology, because he wanted to get an MFA in photography. I told him I didn't think this was a very good idea. He had a brilliant career ahead of him with what he was doing. He felt certain, however, that it was time for him to change direction. He got that degree, and now he's an associate professor of photography at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. He wrote recently to say, "It is wonderful teaching at a liberal arts college. Your history classes were very helpful as I incorporate theory and history into my studio classes. Aki makes photographs of mirrors and tape adhered to the surface of the mirror, taken with a camera on a tripod. His images attempt to unpack the structural mechanics of photographic representation." I meandered through 45 years of adulthood, taking one turn after another. Sports photographer, fine art photographer, curator of corporate collection, director of small nonprofit art center, and now curator of a museum collection. I never did teach English literature. For now, it seems like Aki is not going to work as a computer engineer either. Sometimes it's worth considering. If one point of focus isn't working, try another. Thank you.